me to give you?" Solomon answered, "You've shown me great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You've continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. Now, Lord my God, you've made your servant king in place of my father David. But I'm only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duty. Your servant is here among the people you've chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, "Since you have asked for this, and not for a long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I'll do what you've asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I'll give you what you've not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you'll have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands as David your father did, I'll give you a long life." Then Solomon awoke and he realized it had been a dream. The word of the Lord. Oh, it isn't. He returned to Jerusalem, stood before the ark of the Lord's covenant, and sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then he gave a feast for all his court. Now 2 prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. One of them said, "Pardon me, my lord. This woman and I live in the same house. I had a baby and she was there with me. The 3rd day after my child was born, this woman also had a baby. We were alone. There was no one in the house but the 2 of us. During the night, this woman's son died because she lay on him. So she got up in the middle of the night and took my son from my side, while I, your servant, was asleep. And she put him by her breast and put her dead son to my breast. The next morning I got up to nurse my son, and he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't the son I had borne." The other woman said, "No, the living one is my son, the dead one is yours." But the first one insisted, "No, the dead one is yours, the living one is mine." And so they argued before the king. The king said, "This one says my son is alive and your son is dead, while that one says, no, your son is dead and mine is alive." Then the king said, "Bring me a sword." So they brought a sword for the king. He then gave an order: "Cut the living child in 2 and give half to one and half to the other." The woman whose son was alive was deeply moved out of love for her son and said to the king, "Please, my lord, give her the living baby, don't kill him." But the other said, "Neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in 2. Then the king gave his ruling: "Give the living baby to the first woman. Do not kill him. She is his mother." When all Israel heard the verdict the king had given, they held the king in high awe because they saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice.
That's it, mate.
I've got it. Sorry about that.
Don't apologise, brother. You read the Bible beautifully. You barely need to preach when someone's read the Bible so well. And that was well read, mate. That story, I don't know how many times I've read it or heard it. I've heard it at least twice today. It moves me almost every time. It is one of the most gripping stories. Something's wrong here with this thing. That's that, is it? Right. Righto. I'll just keep talking. One of the most gripping stories. As is this one. In 1815, a drought in the Sydney region wiped out the crops. Food was short in the colony. In early 1816, floods hit the Sydney basin, destroying the summer plantings. It never rains, it pours. Food was even scarcer, both for the settlers and the Aboriginal tribes, by now living on the outskirts around Appin, Camden and beyond. In February 1816, a farm on the Nepean River owned by the Palmer family was robbed by a group of 40 Gandangara men. Settlers pursued them, killed some of them, and they themselves were ambushed. 4 settlers died. A week later, John MacArthur's farm was robbed. 3 more settlers died. Another posse was sent out, another ambush, this time a woman and her convict servant killed. We can't be sure how many Aboriginal people died in these skirmishes. Their story was never told. But this was a major crisis in the colony. Front page of the Sydney Gazette. Governor Macquarie had to respond, but what to do? What would you have done? On the one hand, the Gandangara people were hungry. Those men had families to feed, and they no longer had access to all their land. On the other hand, 9 settlers were dead. The people demanded justice. What to do? We live in a complicated world. Think today even of Gaza and Ukraine. The UK has had riots through the week. Who can claim to know exactly what's best and right? Even in our own lives this afternoon, there are complexities. Family disputes over money, dealing with the consequences of past bad behaviour by a parent, a sibling or a child, dealing with loss and grief and its impact on mental well-being, caring for the chronically ill in our lives when hope of healing is faded, even navigating the complexities of social activities, who to invite, who not to invite. What does true love and wisdom look like on the ground in the mess and the brokenness? And even if we knew what it looked like, who of us would have the strength and goodness to do it? We're working through 1 Kings, which is ultimately a book about the one king, Jesus. It was written during the exile, and I've got the ski jump diagram here again, when God's people had no king. So you see the exile down the bottom there, or just as it jumps up a little bit. It's a long way from here, I can tell you. It's very small, but I'm sure you can see it. They had no king, but they had all kinds of complexities to deal with. And they were looking back 500 years to the top of the ski jump there, asking what would a good king look like? Even the great King David was hindered by weakness and wickedness, we saw in chapters 1 and 2. But what about his son Solomon? Now we know, don't we, that he ended badly. But he starts well, and his strong start gives us a pretty full outline of the kind of king that Jesus is, especially his heart of wisdom. Now, if you've got your Bibles open to 1 Kings, turn with me there to 1 Kings chapter 3. I'm just turning it up here myself. You can see in verse 15, we read there that Solomon stood before the ark of the Lord's covenant. Okay? And then if you go to verse 16, now 2 prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. So when I was preparing, my eye just sort of caught that hinge verse, those hinge verses, the king standing before the Lord and the women standing before the king. And I thought, well, there's my 2 points, right, on the screen. The king before his Lord, the people before their king. You would have come up with that too if you'd looked at it long enough, I'm sure. The Bible is for everyone to read. So let's look at this first one. Verse 3, the king before his Lord. Now I want to show you something in verse 3. This is it literally. The NIV unfortunately obscures this. It simply says this: Solomon loved the Lord. Full stop. That's it. I point that out because that is the central verse in this chapter. Solomon loved the Lord. Now, Abraham, we're told, loved Isaac in Genesis 22. Jacob loved Joseph, we're told, in Genesis 37. Jonathan loved David, we're told, in 1 Samuel 18. Nina Kennedy, she loved her gold medal. And I did too. It was a great effort. A lot of physics involved there. Solomon loved the Lord. No one else is described in this way in the Old Testament. Now, it's not saying no one else loved the Lord, but it is saying there was something special about Solomon. If God's king is going to govern our complex world with wisdom, it starts with loving the Lord. Now, actually, it starts a bit further back than that, because when he was born, Solomon was named Jedediah, which means loved by the Lord. 2 Samuel 12:24. See, the one who was loved by the Lord loves the Lord. Now, let's just jump forward quickly, 1,000 years to Jesus. In John chapter 5, verse 20, Jesus says, "The Father loves the Son." So he was loved by the Lord. And then in John 14, verse 31, we read, Jesus says there, "I love the Father." See, wisdom doesn't start in a textbook or a rule book, but in the heart. Christ's heart was perfect. Solomon's a shadow of perfection, at least at the start. And Solomon's love for the Lord is seen in 3 W's in this passage. Firstly, he's walking, verse 3, in obedience to the Lord as instructed by his father David. Did he do it perfectly? No, thank God Jesus did. Secondly, he's worshipping, verse 4. The king went to Gibeon, which was north of Jerusalem, to offer sacrifices, for that was the most important high place. Now, in terms of worship, this was a transition season for Israel. And I want you to just not read Solomon's later sins back into these verses, if you can try and avoid that. We immediately read these verses and we think, oh, idolatry. Don't. Let me explain something. Remember, there was no temple at this point, right? The plans were still in council. It was coming. And the big tent that Moses built, that's the tabernacle, that was pitched in Gibeon, on the high place, with the altar of burnt offering there out the front. And presumably all the priests were there in Gibeon at the high place, where God wanted them to be, worshipping him. While a little tent with the Ark of the Covenant was actually in Jerusalem. Yes, the tabernacle and the ark were at different places. Have a read in 2 Chronicles chapter 1. You can see it all nice and clearly spelled out there. Not now, though. Here, hence you see the burnt offerings on the altar at Gibeon, verse 4, 1,000 of them. That's a lot of meat, folks. And then standing before the ark of the Lord in Jerusalem in verse 15. Solomon's doing nothing wrong. Loving the Lord means worshipping him his way. Solomon admits his sin, burnt offering, and celebrates forgiveness, fellowship offering. Now, just to pause here, aren't you glad here today that Jesus has provided the once for all time sacrifice of his own life on the cross to pay for our sin and bring us home to God? Who's glad about that? I am, I tell you. No need for animal sacrifice anymore, and no need, wonderfully, for ongoing sacrifice. Christ's death was enough to clear our heart debt, and he cleared it forever in a one-off payment. So rich and priceless was his life. Now, if you're here this Arvo and you're still burdened by your guilt and shame from your mistakes and misadventures, or if you are bruised in your heart by the mistakes of others, then I just plead with you, come to Jesus today. Come to Jesus. He will wash away the stain of your sin, and he will bind up the wounds from the sins of others. Isn't that beautiful? What an offer. I love it. Now, some commentators focus on what they think Solomon is doing wrong in this passage, marrying Pharaoh's daughter and things like that. Perhaps there are some hints of trouble ahead, but the text, I want you to focus on the text. The text simply tells us one main thing: Solomon loved the Lord. And he walked in obedience, he worshipped, and most importantly at this point, he wanted wisdom. God appears to him in a dream: ask for whatever you want me to give you. Now, what would you ask for if the Lord appeared in your dream? I don't think he's going to, by the way, but if he did, what would you ask for? In 2017, McCrindle released their Living the Dream research based on a survey of 30,000 Aussies who were asked about what they most want. Listen to what Gen Y said. That's the 30 to 42-year-olds, right? They said, 1, financial freedom and independence. 2, lifestyle of my choice. 3, safety and security. 4, owning a home. And 5, having a family. They don't want much. Now, other generations said almost the same, but in a slightly different order. Now, this, friends, is totally unsurprising. We humans, all of us, long for safety and security on this earth. But Solomon loved the Lord. And so he asked for something not of this earth. That's the shock of this passage. He asks for, look at in verse 9, he says there, give your servant literally a listening heart to govern your people. A listening heart. And his request pleased the Lord, verse 10. The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth or for yourself, nor the death of your enemies. Now it's interesting, isn't it? You see, God knows what humans naturally want. I mean, at this point, he'd been listening to humans' prayers for nearly 2,000 years. It wasn't like he didn't have some evidence there up in heaven. And that's what struck him so profoundly. Solomon was out of the box. He loved the Lord. There's the king before his Lord. And let's come to the second and last point, the people before their king. Now, I say the people because I think these two prostitutes represent the people of Israel. Now, how do I know that, or how do we know that? Well, verse 18, have a look with me there. You can see, when all Israel heard the verdict the king had given, what? They looked down their noses at the prostitutes and thanked God they weren't like them. They called for a royal commission into how 2 prostitutes ended up in the presence of the king. No, they held the king in awe because he had wisdom. Deep down, you see, the people knew they needed it just as much as the prostitutes. Now, the most in-demand jobs in Australia in 2024, you ready for it? If you're looking for a job, this is where you'd want to go. Firstly, civil engineer. Secondly, plumber. Third, registered nurse. Fourth, dentist. Fifth, psychologist. And sixth, construction manager. Now, there's no mention of prostitution. It's not on any list of desired jobs. These women are desperate. You enter the house of prostitution, mostly through desperation door. And I want to put to you, but by now, in its history, Israel is pretty desperate. It's over 450 years of failure if you just go back to Moses. It's even further back, longer if you go back to Abraham. But think about the golden calf, the wilderness wanderings, the book of Judges, King Saul's reign, And even great David lost his way at the end. And note the heart of the conflict. And this is what compels me actually to think that the prostitutes represent God's people. The heart of the conflict is jealousy. Did you see it there? Look at verse 26. The woman whose son was alive was deeply moved out of love. Please, Lord, give her the living baby, don't kill him. But the others said, look at this, chilling words, no, neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in two. In other words, if I can't have him, you won't either. If I'm sad, you're not going to be happy. Kill the baby. Now, this reminds me of those terrible reports you hear on the news from time to time of a parent killing themselves and their children to get back at the spouse. Years later, or maybe not that many years later, I don't know when he wrote it, Solomon wrote these words. I think they're on the screen. Anger is cruel and fury is overwhelming. But who can stand before jealousy? Who indeed? Cain killed Abel because he was jealous. Sarah got rid of Hagar because she was jealous. Esau wanted to kill Jacob because he was jealous. Joseph's brothers got rid of him because they were jealous. Saul tried to kill David because he was jealous. The religious leaders killed Jesus because they were jealous. It's the devil's wrecking ball in humanity. And it's alive and well today, even in the church. Listen to James writing to believers. It's on the screen. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but you do not have, so you kill. We kill family life. We kill friendships. We kill community, or try to. In his book, Respectable Sins, Jerry Bridges names jealousy. And he writes, I recently learnt that a friend who has written about as many books as me receives requests to speak all over the world. And I was jealous. None of us are immune. And all of us need the wisdom of God's King. And mercifully, he welcomes us. Did you see in verse 16? Look at it there. The two prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. That's a very beautiful moment of grace in the history of God's people, pointing directly ahead to Christ. What did they say of Christ? Have a look in Matthew 9, verse 11. It's on the screen. The Pharisees asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? He ate with them because he loved them and wanted to help them. You can imagine Solomon's advisors saying, listen, king, we've got a couple of prostitutes out the back here. Do you want us to get rid of them? And Solomon says, no, bring them in. Bring them in. And the wisdom of God's King overcomes human jealousy. Who can stand against jealousy? Only God's King. He's unencumbered, you see, by the things on the outside, so he discerns the inside and gets to the heart. And the baby lives. God's King delivers from death. And it's all because of his wisdom alone. See, did you note there were no witnesses? Verse 18, there was no one in the house but the two of us, we read. And do you note that there is no input from any advisors? The king alone loves the Lord, and the king alone administers justice. Now, the DC comic series has a character called Shazam in it. I've never seen it or read one, but two nerds came up to me after a morning church and they confirmed this is all true. I'm not going to name them, but they were excited that I'd mentioned Shazam in the sermon. And anyway, Shazam apparently has the wisdom of Solomon. And you hear that phrase from time to time, don't you? You need the wisdom of Solomon. And look, the whole book of Proverbs is there to give you a bit of wisdom of Solomon. And I encourage you to read it and take it in to heart. But you know, here we're learning that we don't have the wisdom of Solomon by nature. That's the point. There are some Bible passages that says, let's try and be like the king. This isn't one of them, folks. This is simply, let's love God's King because we're so not like him. See, look again at verse 28. When all Israel heard the verdict the king had given them, they what? Look up. Are they all registered for their local wisdom workshops? So they too could have the wisdom of Solomon? No. They held the king in awe. Now, think again with me of Jesus, the great king. We're told at one point that he knew in his spirit what the Pharisees were thinking in their hearts. Wisdom. Focused on the heart. We're told in John 2:25, he knew what was in a person. Wisdom. Focused on the heart. What about the time he silenced the religious leaders with a coin? Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and to God what belongs to God. Wisdom. And what about his heart-piercing parables of the Good Samaritan and the prodigal son? And what about his death and resurrection, outsmarting the devil once for all, not just saving one child with his wisdom, but saving all God's children from the ravages of jealousy and everything else that will tear us to pieces. The King is wise and stronger. Stand in awe of him, church. Stand in awe of him. Now, if you're going with the flow in our wealth-obsessed, superficial society, you will hold in awe tonight those with lots of houses and a very full investment portfolio. Oh, how wise are these people? Rubbish, according to the scriptures. I mean, I took a funeral this week. Mitch's mum, Paula. We're praying for you. 98. I say this every time. I'm going to say it again. Not because I don't think you're listening. I just want to remind you. There was not one single mention of the houses Paula owned or didn't own, of the car she drove or didn't drive, of anything to do with material possessions. Not one mention. Please take note. It counts for nothing at the end. But by golly, God's wisdom does. God's wisdom. Stand in awe of your King, sisters and brothers, who had nowhere to lay his head, but who knows your heart through and through. Now, how would you know if you're standing in awe of your King right now? Two things very briefly. I don't know, you wouldn't know this, but Duke set up a timer up on the back here. It's gone yellow, which I think means go your hardest. You got all the time in the world. That's how I'm interpreting it. It's gone from green to yellow, and if it turns colour at any point, I'll let you know. But you're going to look now, aren't you? 23 minutes. We're only starting. We're going to finish, folks. Two things briefly. Admit our need for help in a complex world. That's how you'll show you're standing in awe. You know, some stuff in life is reasonably simple, right? Here's a few decisions that I'll give you that are right, nice and easy, at least to begin with. Do I honour my parents? Yes. Do I steal from the boss? No. Do I love the poor and care for them? Yes. Do I have sex outside marriage? No. Do I meet with God's people regularly? Yes. Just God keeps it pretty simple in those sort of spaces. I could go on, but you know, much of life is complex. And simple answers in complex situations are silly. Silly at best and dangerous at worst. So back to the story from the start. Lachlan Macquarie ordered an assault on the Gandangara tribe out at Appin. And we now know it as the Appin Massacre. 14 Aboriginal people died, including some who fell to their death trying to escape over a cliff. It was a terrible moment in Australian history, one of many. But if we sit here this afternoon thinking we would have done better, I wonder if we're really engaging with the reality of the complexity of the situation. I commend John Harris's book, Judging the Macquaries, for helpful input. But holding the king in awe, friends, means we are humble in the face of complexities. Life's conundrums are there to show us how little we know, not how much we know. Mervyn King was the governor of the Reserve Bank of the UK during the 2008 global financial crisis. He's written a book called Radical Uncertainty, in which he's calling on world leaders to stop proposing simple solutions to complex problems like mass migration and climate changing and rising militarism. He's pleading with politicians to rediscover three simple words: we don't know. But we're making the best decisions we can with the information we do have. Now, Christians, we can help our leaders with this posture because we hold the king in awe, yes? In him are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. And that means we don't expect to find it in earthly leaders. And we don't criticise them harshly when we don't. And when we hold the king in awe, you know what else we do? We can welcome one another warmly. We can be gracious with one another. We can be less critical and judging of one another in the complexities of our lives. We admit our need for help. Second and finally, we ask for help. The prostitutes got a lot wrong in their lives. That's obvious. But the one thing they got right is the most important thing. They went to the king. I don't know what conundrum you're facing right now, at home, at work, at school. Perhaps it's overwhelming. You can't even articulate it. Perhaps there's layers and layers. Maybe you're so tired of trying to navigate the complexities you just want to give up. I hope this question doesn't sound flippant to finish, but are you coming to the king for wisdom? Are you crying out to him for help? Now, I'm sure you are, but I'm just checking, because it's amazing how easily we can overlook this. One of the big hurdles we face is shame and guilt. We can imagine wrongly that we're not able to come into his presence, which is why I think the prostitute story is so beautifully placed. And I wonder if James had it in mind when he wrote, "If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you." Amen. It went red, by the way, so yeah. A universally accepted colour.
Why don't you stand and join us as we sing "Be Thou My Vision." Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart. Lord, be all else to me, save that thou art. Thou my best Lord, by day or by night. Waking or sleeping, thy presence my light.
Be thou my wisdom, be thou my true word. Be thou my battle shield, sword for the fight. Be thou my dignity, thou my delight. Thou my soul shelter, and thou my high tower. Raise thou me heavenward, O power of my power. Riches I heed not, no man's empty praise. Thou my inheritance now and always. Thou and thou only art first in my heart. High King of heaven, my treasure thou art. High King of heaven, my victory's won. May I reach heaven's joys, O bright heaven's sun. Heart of my own heart, whatever before, still be my vision, O ruler of all. Heart of my own heart, whatever before, still be my vision, O ruler of all.
In the darkness we were waiting, without hope, without light, till from heaven you came running. There was mercy in your eyes, to fulfill the law and prophets. To a virgin came the word, from a throne of endless glory to a cradle in the dirt.
Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. To reveal the kingdom come, and to reconcile the lost, to redeem the whole creation. You did not despise the cross, for even in your suffering you saw to the other side, knowing this was our salvation. Jesus, for our sake you died. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. In the morning that you rose, all of heaven held its breath, till the stone was moved for good, for the Lamb had conquered death. And the dead rose from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe, for the souls of all who come to the Father His gospel truth of old shall not fear, shall not faint. By His blood and in His name, in His freedom I am free. For the love of Jesus Christ, who has resurrected me. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Praise forever to the King of Kings.
Solomon loved the Lord. Do you love the Lord? And to go a bit deeper, do you tell the Lord that you love him? I know I don't always, but I'm hoping to change that this week. And if you want to know more about how God loves us, then come along to the Life series this Thursday, because we'll be talking about how God loves us. And I'll be there, so I'll see you. So as we head out, let's love our brothers and sisters for the next service as they prepare and head out quite quickly. But please stay around for a cuppa. I'd love to have a chat to you and hear about how you've been challenged today and to get to know you a little bit better. Have a great week.